The Ted Bundy Case. The Darkness Behind the Perfect Smile. Part 1/3. He was handsome, charming, smart, and had a smile that made every girl believe he was harmless. But behind those smiling eyes was the cold darkness of a predator. He was Ted Bundy, America's most sophisticated serial killer of the 1970 seconds, and a chilling symbol of the devil in human form. In 1974, in Washington state, strange disappearances began to spread. Young women, mostly college students, disappeared after normal afternoons. There was no blood, no trace of a fight, just a void as if they had been erased from this world. The police were bewildered, the press was panicked, and people were so afraid that they did not dare go out alone. At first, no one expected that the most wanted killer in America was a brilliant law student, a former political campaign volunteer with a face as perfect as a movie star. Ted Bundy, the model son, the perfect boyfriend, the promising student, was hiding in the crowd, smiling at them, shaking their hands, and then killing them. He was unlike any other serial killer of his time. Not crazy, not taciturn, not attracting attention. He was so integrated into society that even his friends, colleagues, and girlfriends could not believe the accusations. But small clues, vague statements, scratches on the victim's wrists gradually painted a picture of a man who knew how to manipulate both fear and trust. Ted Bundy was born in 1946 inches, Burlington, Vermont. From a young age, his life was covered in a fog of lies. He grew up believing his grandparents were his parents, and his biological mother was his sister. The sense of betrayal and loss of identity left him with a deep psychological void, what psychologists later called the empty abyss of Bundy identity. Despite this, he was a good student, well-mannered, and especially attractive to women. Young girls were captivated by his confident eyes, deep voice, and calm demeanor. But no one knew that behind his courtly courtship were the meticulous observations of a predator choosing his next victim. The deaths begin. In January 1974, the first girl was attacked. Karen Sparks, a student at the University of Washington. She was brutally beaten in her apartment, surviving but permanently injured. Police found no trace except a few strands of hair and strange footprints. A few months later, Linda Healy, a beautiful college student, disappeared from her room. The sheets and blankets were taken, and there was no sign of a struggle. Everything was too clean, as if the perpetrator were extremely careful and intelligent. That same year, a series of similar disappearances occurred in Seattle, then Utah, Colorado. All the victims had something in common: young brown hair, parted in the middle, slim build. The police recognized a pattern but could not connect them to a single person. The press dubbed him the brown-haired woman hunter. And he's still living in the crowd, laughing, going to school, falling in love, and killing again. The charmer with crutches. One afternoon in July 1974, at Lake Sammamish, hundreds of people were sunbathing and playing. In the crowd, a handsome, dashing young man with a cast on his arm walked up to ask for help. He introduced himself as Ted, said he had a broken arm, and asked a few girls to help him load the small boat onto the car. The two girls disappeared that day. They were never seen again. When police questioned witnesses, dozens said they had seen a guy named Ted driving a metallic brown VW Beetle. The name, the face, the car, all were real. But no one suspected that Ted was Ted Bundy, a law student, a volunteer in a crime prevention campaign, and the devoted lover of a girl named Elizabeth Klopfer. The darkness in her lover's mind. Elizabeth loved Ted passionately. He was gentle, attentive, even cooked for her, and cared for her stepdaughter as if she were her own. But the longer Elizabeth stayed, the more strange things she noticed. Ted disappeared for hours, had scratches on his hands, kept the car a secret, and often had a faint smell of blood on his clothes. As news of the Seattle killer spread, Elizabeth began to have doubts. At one point, she even called the police, saying her boyfriend might be the killer. The police took statements, but Ted Bundy, with his clean record, his kind face, his steady job, was not investigated further. He continued to travel around the state, killing people, moving the bodies to the mountains, and returning to the scene days later to reunite with his victims. A terrible perversion that only he understood. The chase began. As the disappearances continued in several states, the FBI began to investigate. They recognized a pattern. Every time Ted Bundy left the city, someone would disappear. He used his sharp intellect to avoid every legal trap. He knew how to lie, knew the limits of the law, knew when to keep quiet. Bundy was a killer, but he also understood how the police thought. By late 1975, things were starting to fall apart. A Utah woman named Carol DaRonch managed to escape Ted after he tricked her into getting into his car. She gave a detailed account. He pretended to be a police officer, said she was involved in a burglary, and handcuffed her in the car. But she struggled, opened the car door, and escaped. That account became the first piece of the puzzle that tied Ted Bundy to his string of crimes. In August 1975, Utah police stopped Bundy's VW Beetle. They found rope, a mask, handcuffs, and a small crowbar. Ted smiled and said it was for home repairs. But the police sensed he was no ordinary man. They took him into custody, and from there, the 5-year manhunt began. When the police opened his trunk, they found more than just restraints. They opened a window into hell, where intelligence and charm became the weapons of a serial killer. Ted Bundy was arrested in August 1975. At first he remained chillingly calm. In the interrogation room he spoke like a lawyer, even preaching about the right to remain silent and the right to a lawyer. Investigators couldn't believe they were dealing with a suspect, but he acted like a man of the law. But something began to catch the police's attention. His eyes never betrayed any emotion. He smiled when he spoke, but his gaze remained blank, no fear, no remorse. One officer wrote in his report, "When I looked into Bundy's eyes, I felt like I was looking into a deep, bottomless pit where a person's soul had disappeared." While he was in custody, the police collected evidence. They found Carol DaRonch's hair in his car, along with other clues from other disappearances. Gradually, the wall began to close around Ted. But what no one expected was that Bundy wouldn't stand still. He was smart, cunning, and always one step ahead of everyone. The first escape. In June 1977, Ted Bundy was transferred to the Pitkin County Courthouse in Colorado to defend himself because he believed no one could do it better. While he was allowed to study the documents, he jumped out of a second-story window of the courthouse and disappeared into the woods. The manhunt lasted 6 days. Hundreds of police officers scoured the mountains, but Bundy, a survivalist, smart and reckless, survived by stealing food from people's homes and sleeping in abandoned cabins. He was finally caught wandering around, emaciated and hungry. But just 6 months later, he escaped a second time, this time more successfully than ever. Bundy used a hole in the ceiling of his cell to climb into the attic and then crawl out through an air vent. When the guards discovered him, he had left Colorado and driven all the way to Florida, where he would commit the most brutal crimes of his life. A Florida nightmare. In January 1978, a horrific tragedy occurred at the Chi Omega dormitory at Florida State University. In the early morning hours of January 15, Bundy sneaked into the building, carrying a piece of wood. In less than 15 minutes, he beat 2 female students to death and seriously injured 2 others. Police described the scene as one of the most brutal they had ever seen. Blood on the walls, hair and handprints on the bedsheets. Just hours later, he attacked another woman, Cheryl Thomas, in a nearby apartment, fracturing her skull and nearly killing her. Florida was shaken. People had no idea who could be so cruel, but the familiar motifs, the calm, the cold, the hollow eyes, were returning. The police had no idea they were dealing with Ted Bundy, the escaped prisoner from Colorado, thousands of miles away. Arrested and smiling again. On the 15th of February 1978, a patrol officer in Pensacola, Florida, stopped a suspicious Volkswagen. The driver, disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, showed only a fake license. When the officer asked him to get out of the car, he attacked, then was subdued. At the station, when asked his name, he was silent for a moment, then flashed his familiar smile. "I am Ted Bundy." The words sent shivers down America's spine. America's most notorious serial killer was caught. But he wasn't done yet. For Ted, it was just beginning. The trial of the century, Ted Bundy's 1979 trial, was televised a first in American history. The entire nation watched as the man, both the defendant and his own lawyer, was on television. He was poised, confident, and smiling in front of the cameras. He flirted with reporters, chatted intimately with opposing counsel, and he knew how to project the image of a misunderstood man. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. His teeth marks matched the bite marks on the body of Lisa Levy, one of the 2 girls killed at Chi Omega. As the dental expert presented his evidence, Ted tried to remain calm, but his face slowly lost color. It was the first time during the entire trial that he lost his absolute confidence. It took the jury only a few hours to reach its verdict. Guilty, first-degree murder. Penalty, death by electric chair. Ted Bundy listened to the verdict, did not cry, did not tremble, just turned to the court and whispered, "Bless you all." Those words made many people shudder. Some reporters described, they were not the words of a repentant man, but the farewell of a monster who knew he would be remembered forever. The hunt in the mind. During his many years in prison, Ted Bundy still attracted public attention. He received hundreds of letters from women everywhere. Some even proposed love. Psychologists, investigators, and even the FBI came to interview him. Not just to understand Ted Bundy, but to understand how a normal person could become a monster. Bundy spoke calmly, sometimes analyzing himself. "I wasn't born a killer. I just became one. Little by little. It was as if something inside me wanted to see how weak people were." He blamed violent pornography, a deceitful childhood, society, but investigators knew it was just a final disguise. Bundy never repented. The last smile. On the 24th of January 1989, after more than a decade of delays and appeals, Ted Bundy was taken to the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Hundreds gathered outside, holding signs reading, "Burn, Bundy, burn." They cheered as the prison lights flashed, the signal that the sentence had been carried out. Witnesses say, before being electrocuted, Ted smiled one last time, then whispered, "My love to my family and friends." And with that, the light went out. America's most charming serial killer disappeared in a puff of smoke. But his story, the wounds he left behind, still haunt humanity to this day. Even before his body cooled, people began to talk. Was Ted Bundy really dead? Or was that smile, that spirit, still wandering somewhere in people's minds? On the morning of the execution, the sky over Florida was dark as an omen. Groups of people gathered outside the prison gates, carrying beer, bread, and large signs. "Burn, Bundy, burn." As the 2,000-volt current passed through him, many cheered. But somewhere in the crowd, there were other eyes not happy, but thoughtful, because they knew Ted Bundy's death didn't end the story. It only opened another door, a door into the mind of a demon with a human face. The remaining pieces. After Bundy died, investigators across the country began to sift through hundreds of unsolved missing persons files. They compared teeth marks, hair samples, DNA, and even fragmentary confessions Bundy had made before his execution. The results sent a chill through the nation. Ted Bundy may have killed more than 30 women, perhaps even more than the official count. Some of the bodies have never been found. One of the veteran investigators, Robert Keppel, recalled, "Bundy didn't just kill. He enjoyed controlling his victims, enjoying being God. When he spoke of them, he didn't call them women. He called them property." That statement shows that, for Bundy, killing was not about hate or lust, but a game of power. He wanted to prove that he was smarter than everyone else, that he could control the police, the media, and the public, and it was scary he did it for many years. The ghost in criminal psychology. After the Ted Bundy case, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, began building a new branch of investigation, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, specializing in criminal psychology. It was the interviews with Ted Bundy in prison that helped the FBI better understand the way a serial killer thinks, acts, and is satisfied. Legendary investigator John Douglas, who later became the basis for the Mindhunter series, once said, "Bundy taught us that serial killers are not always insane. They can be charming, educated, and perfectly integrated into society. They are nightmares in perfect disguise." From there, America began to change the way it viewed crime. Previously, people believed serial killers were eccentric, socially excluded people. But Bundy showed a more frightening truth. They can be your neighbor, your classmate, your lover, and you won't notice until it's too late. The woman who called the police, and no one believed her. Among all the victims and investigators, there is one woman who is always forgotten. Elizabeth Klopfer, Bundy's longtime lover. She was the first to call the police in 1974, saying her boyfriend might be the Ted in the disappearances. But the police didn't believe her. After Bundy was arrested, Elizabeth fell into a state of terrible torment. She recounted in her memoir that she had looked into Ted's eyes when he hugged her, and now realized there was nothing in them. She said, "I thought he was the man I loved, but in fact, I was kissing the darkness." That quote was quoted by journalists many years later as a tragic symbol for women who believed in perfection, only to be betrayed by the very thing they believed in most. Bundy's image. The seducer and the devil. What made Ted Bundy special was not just the number of people he killed, but the way he made people unable to believe he was a killer. He was polite, well-dressed, soft-spoken, intelligent, educated, and knew how to smile at the right time. Even when he was sentenced to death, he still made a part of the public feel pity. Some people called him a man of two faces. By day he was a model law student. By night, he was a devil in human form. But psychologists say for Bundy there were no two faces. He had only one, and that was absolute emptiness. Media hysteria. During the 1,980 seconds, newspapers, television, and even movies exploited Ted Bundy. He became a cultural icon of crime. People were afraid, curious, and fascinated. His final interviews were broadcast nationwide, in which he spoke calmly, even convincingly, like a speaker. One reporter recalled, "I sat across from him, and for the first 10 minutes, I forgot I was talking to a serial killer. He made you feel safe, and then the next minute he sent shivers down your spine." It was this contrast, charm and terror, that made Bundy the subject of dozens of films, books, and documentaries. But sadly, many people forgot the real victims. The young women who lost their lives in extreme fear. Lessons from the dark. Ted Bundy is proof that evil does not always have an ugly face. It can smile, it can say loving words, it can help others, only to strike when you are off guard. He not only killed people, but also killed trust. Investigators later always refer to Bundy as a lesson that should never be forgotten. Never trust the face, look at the action. The devil is not born with horns and a tail. He wears a human skin. After Bundy died, the number of serial killers in the US increased rapidly in the 80 seconds and 90 seconds. But thanks to the analysis of Bundy's profile, the FBI had the basis to track down people like Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, BTK Killer, names that later haunted the world. Dark legacy. Today, Ted Bundy is still one of the most searched names when people mention serial killer. Many films, documentaries, and even criminal psychology courses begin with the question, what made someone as smart and charming as Ted Bundy turn into a monster? There is no definitive answer. It could have been a childhood of deception. It could have been a dominant instinct. It could have simply been an unfillable void in his mind. But whatever it was, Ted Bundy proved that evil can lurk in the most beautiful of things. The last look. Before his execution, Bundy spoke to a pastor, and it is said that he cried not out of remorse, but out of fear. One of the investigators who dealt with him said, when the electric shock went through him, he still managed to smile. Perhaps, in that moment, he still wanted to control how others saw him, even in death. Outside the prison, people cheered, but in the heart of America, something was still uneasy. Because Ted Bundy was more than just a man. He was a mirror of humanity's darkest side, where beauty, intelligence, and evil can blend so seamlessly that they are indistinguishable. He's dead, but every time we see a perfect smile, a confident look in the eyes, and think we're safe maybe, somewhere, Bundy is still smiling.